So everyone says run your marathon at marathon pace, but what does that actually mean? It's such a long distance. Is it the pace you can hold fresh in training? Is it the pace this pace calculator spit out? Is it I want to run 3 hours or 3:30 or 2:30? Therefore, should I train at that pace? Should it feel easy? Should it feel hard? Why does your marathon pace in week 8 of training completely feel different than at mile 18 on race day? And is marathon pace even the same thing as your aerobic threshold or LT1 or zone 2 or all this other language we put out there? Today, I'm going to try and break down and make marathon pace crystal clear for you, show you how to find your actual marathon pace without guessing, and teach you how it should feel at different points in your training and in your race. I'm going to try and fix some of the biggest mistakes I see that cost runners minutes, sometimes tens of minutes on race day. And I want to give you some plug and play sessions at the end that I've used with my athletes all the way from 2:12 to 6 hours to help them finally crack the code on pacing the marathon appropriately. For those of you who haven't followed along yet, I'm Brant Stachel. I'm a former national team running coach, mental performance coach, and over the last 15 years, I've coached everyone from first-time marathoners to Olympic hopefuls. And I've tried to help athletes break through the physical and mental plateaus using evidence-based training and mindset strategies. And I've guided over 150 athletes now to Boston qualification. I've coached more than 24 athletes to represent Canada internationally. And I've spent about as much time in the lab and the therapy room as I have on the track. And so when I'm talking about this stuff, I'm not really guessing. I'm actually trying to give you insight in terms of the things we've done at a high level and an age group level for multiple years. And that's why I've started this channel. I'm breaking down different training and trying to give you as much information as possible. And in my quest to do that, I've included a couple links below. One is my marathon readiness assessment. So this is what I look at when I'm starting with a new athlete. If you want to get it, you can download for free. The first email you get with your results is also going to include my free carb load guide and mental performance worksheets, just to give you as much as I can to really help you be confident on race day. So let's dive in. So as I did in some of my other training pace videos, I want to break down all the nomenclature we use, because in our sport, we use like 10 different languages. I'm going to try and make sure we're all on the same page for this video so we speak the same language. When we talk about marathon pace, there's a lot of confusion because it sits in this weird middle ground physiologically between easy running and tempo pace. And depending on your fitness level, marathon pace might be closer to one or closer to the other. So for one of my elites, Thomas Nobbs, you can watch his series on what we did. His marathon pace is much closer to his tempo pace than it is for me when I ran 2:46, or for when I have athletes who run 3:30 or 4 hours. So let's get clear on what marathon pace actually is and isn't. First, marathon pace is not your easy pace, though for some beginners it might be really close. So think if you're over 4 hours, it's probably pretty close to your easy pace. Marathon pace is also not your tempo pace or your LT2 threshold, though for elites running sub 210, it gets really, really close. And so it's also not your aerobic threshold or LT1. It's above that. It's not a percentage of your VO2 max that's the same for everyone. And I've covered this in a couple videos where we can't really use percentages or guidelines. There's no physiological switch once we hit 70% versus 71. And so it's important to know what it isn't so we can start to describe what it is. Marathon pace is the pace you can obviously sustain for 26.2 miles on race day when you're fresh and tapered. Typically it's somewhere, and I don't want to hold myself to being exactly accurate on this, but it's somewhere between 80 and 90% of your max heart rate, depending on your fitness. For most recreational runners, 30 to 60 seconds per mile slower than tempo pace. It's a pace that should feel controlled hard, comfortably uncomfortable. You could describe it as you can speak in short sentences, but you wouldn't want to have a full conversation. Now, I talked about we use multiple languages. So from a zone perspective, this depends on your model. For most people, marathon pace sits in that upper zone 2, lower zone 3 range. In a 5-zone model, you're looking at high zone 3 to low zone 4. In Daniel's language, we literally call it marathon pace, and it sits between your easy pace and your tempo pace. The key thing to remember, and I'm going to hammer this home throughout this video, is marathon pace is highly individual and highly context dependent. What you can hold fresh in training is different from what you can hold in a race. What you can hold in perfect conditions is different from what you can hold in heat, wind, or on a hilly course. So there's two big philosophies when we look at marathon pace, just like tempo. There's different approaches to finding and triangulating and using marathon pace, and I'm going to try and break down the main two and then show you how I actually use it, both depending on the athlete and the situation. So the first one, this is one that I use a little bit more often, would be the Jack Daniels approach. If you've watched my tempo video, if you haven't, I encourage you to watch it. It's a great video as a basis for training. But he created pacing tables based on actual lab testing. He did all the VO2 max, the lactate, the heart rate, and correlated them to race performances. So if you go to the VDOT calculator and plug in your recent race time, it'll spit out your predicted marathon pace based on current fitness. The beauty of this system really is that it's based on equivalent performances. So if you ran a 40-minute 10K, Daniels will tell you what your marathon correlates based on thousands of data points that he accumulated. And it assumes a couple things. First, good conditions, proper pacing, and that you're equally trained across distances. This is key. Most people are not equally trained across distances. So put in a 5K or a 10K or even a half marathon that they're really well trained for, and then expect that they can carry that over to the marathon. So what I do for most people, especially beginners, is I'll take an under distance race result and I'll bump them down 2 to 3 VDOTs, and we'll work on that as a probable likely marathon pace. With the calculator, you can also adjust for heat and altitude. So if you live in a place that's altitude or hot, you can adjust your paces for training and race, and you can also use it for race day for predictive times. The second philosophy would be the physiological approach. I also use this. I'll explain a little bit more how exactly I do it, but I want to break down this philosophy first. So this is more about understanding where your marathon pace falls or sits on the physiological and training kind of spectrum, rather than a specific pace on your watch. And so this approach says that marathon pace should be at or just below your aerobic threshold, your LT1, for most of us, where you can still process lactate efficiently and burn fat as a fuel alongside glycogen. It's not just fat, it's not just glucose or glycogen, it's always both in the marathon. And so the advantage here is that it helps adapt to conditions. If it's hot, you slow down. If you're tired for the week, you adjust. You're not enslaved to the watch. I love that part. The downside is that most people don't have access to regular lactate testing or even well-calibrated sense of their effort levels. So it can be a little bit like loosey-goosey if you don't know what you're doing precisely. This is how I approach it. I use Daniels as a starting point. Plug in a recent race, change a couple of VDOTs depending on their training history, get a ballpark number. But then I triangulate a lot with the qualitative data, how the athlete feels, what I'm seeing in their heart rate response, what they've told me about their training history and specific weaknesses. And I'm constantly adjusting based on the conditions, their local training environment, their reported fatigue, and how the block is going. Because here's the thing, marathon pace in training is a tool to prepare for race day. It's not the race itself, and that distinction is crucial, and I think many athletes miss that. Which begs the question, what marathon pace actually targets, or why are we even doing marathon pace? What's the point physiologically? What am I gaining from this? And so I would argue that one of the big reasons that we do marathon pace is to teach the body how to prepare for the marathon. And so you could break that down. First, it burns fat efficiency alongside glycogen. And so this is huge for going the entire distance of the marathon. It helps you clear lactate at higher speeds. It gets you comfortable with race effort without destroying yourself. And you practice race day fueling and hydration, as well as building some of the mental fortitude and toughness and understanding of what that sustained discomfort's actually going to be like. Additionally, from a psychological perspective, it also helps teach you quite a bit about how the race is going to go. You start to feel and understand the sustainable pace and what that feels like over long distances. It helps teach you resist the urge that we all have to go out too fast when we feel fresh. It helps you trust the process when everyone around you is passing you in the first 6 miles or 10K. It'll also help you stay calm when it hurts at mile 18 because you've been there in training. So marathon pace work is unique because it's one of the few times in training where we're trying to simulate race conditions. With tempo, we're pushing into your threshold. With VO2 max intervals, we're jacking up your ceiling. With easy runs, we're building aerobic base or recovery. But with marathon pace, we're rehearsing. We're practicing the thing we're really actually going to do on race day. And here's what most people don't realize. Marathon pace in training should probably feel easier than you think it should, because in a race, you're fresh, you're tapered, right? We've got adrenaline, we've got the race day vibes, the crowds, everything around us, right? In training, you're carrying fatigue. Maybe it's 40, 50, 60, 70, 100-mile weeks. You did a tempo run on Tuesday. You're not fully carb loaded the day before. Maybe you are or you are not in your race shoes. And so if marathon pace feels hard in training, it's actually normal. If it feels easy, you might be going too slow, or you might be really fit. The context matters here. You might be asking, how do I even find my marathon pace? So let's get really practical here. If you want to find it without just guessing or blindly trusting a calculator, use this triangulation method that I kind of alluded to and how I do it. We look at multiple data points. We look at previous race results. We look at training history, and we find where they converge. So the first data point that I'll always look at is a recent race performance. Ideally, the longer the better. 10K, 15K, half marathon, 30K if you have it, 10 miler even. Plug it into the Daniels VDOT calculator. I've got one on my website that I've linked below you can use that gives you plenty of information. And this will give us a starting point for your current fitness. But as I mentioned above, the catch is the calculators assume you're equally trained across all the distances. So if you just run a 10K PR, congrats, first off, but you haven't done any long runs, your actual marathon pace is going to be slower than what the calculator says because you don't have the specific endurance built yet or the durability from the mileage in the long runs. The second data point that I'm always asking my athletes, and any of my athletes listening to this are going to be sick of it because I always ask them, how did that feel? But that's the question, the feel test. Marathon pace should feel like a 6 or 7 out of 10. You can speak in short sentences, 5 or 6 words at a time, but you probably wouldn't want to have a full-blown conversation. Your breathing is controlled, but it's definitely elevated. You're aware that you're working, and the key here is, though, that you're not suffering. So if you're out there, you're getting ready to do a marathon pace run this weekend or this week, there's a simple question I want you to ask yourself every single time you do marathon pace work. Could I hold this effort for 26.2 miles if I was fresh and tapered? Now, we've all been there. We answer the question of hopes and dreams, and we don't answer it in reality. I want you to answer this question in reality. If you don't feel like you can hold this for 26.2 miles, the pace is probably too fast. I don't want you asking, well, I could hold this for 10 miles today while I'm tired. It's like, no, could you hold it for the full distance if it were race day? If the answer is no, simply you're going too fast. And that's okay. It's too fast for right now. We have time in the build for training to kick in, for metabolic efficiencies, for your ability to handle training and adapt to move you closer to your goal. The third data point that I like to use, and I don't like to lean on this one exclusively, this is why it's third, is heart rate. It's a decent proxy, but it has a lot of limitations. For most people, marathon pace, depending on the calculator, depending on what you use, is going to be 80-ish%. But it varies based on your efficiency, your training history, heat, caffeine, hydration, carb intake, your meals the night before, and how well calibrated your heart rate max is. So this is why I like it as a data point, as a decent proxy, but not what I lean on. So we use it as a check-in, not a prescription. If your heart rate keeps creeping up, you're probably going too hard unless you're really well trained. The fourth point would be the long run test. So one of my favorite ways to dial in marathon pace is to do the last couple miles, 4, 5, 6, 7, depending on the athlete, of a long run at what you think marathon pace is, and let's see how it feels. If you're struggling at mile 16 of an 18 miler, not your marathon pace. Too fast. This is the common mistake. Too fast. You're going to hear me say it plenty of times. Your marathon pace in training should feel sustainable, even when you are tired. Not easy, but sustainable. I know the last section here felt a little doom and gloom, but I promise you what I'm trying to help you do is actually crush it on race day, not just in training. And I see so many athletes who come to me that say through the first 5, 6, 7 weeks of the build, I felt amazing. I was crushing everything. And then I burnt out, or I got injured, or I didn't feel like I could continue on. And I had a really crummy race. And I look at that and I go, this is so avoidable, because if we look at training based on the central question of, I want to perform better on race day, then we work backwards and we understand, okay, what is going to help you today get better? It doesn't have to be a proving point. You don't have to pull the carrots up to see if they're ready today, so we can get better. So on the day it matters, race day, we can actually perform. So I've pushed a little bit, and I want to cover a couple more mistakes that I see athletes do. The biggest one that I see athletes do, coming from stock plans or maybe coaches who aren't giving them a lot of feedback, is they don't adjust for conditions. So right now, when I've created this video, it is the end of January in the Northeast, and we have snow and we have cold and we have ice. And so most athletes assume, oh, I can just go on the treadmill, or I can go outside, and I got to try and hit the same pace. And if I don't, then I'm failing in my marathon build. If you've decided your marathon pace is 8-minute miles, let's say, because that's what a calculator said, or that's what your goal is on race day, and you've made the idea that you're going to run 8-minute miles no matter what, but it's, minus 10 Fahrenheit and there's snow on the ground and it's windy and it's gross, or it has rolling hills, and you're out there grinding 8-minute miles, you're not running in the physiological zone, you're probably going to blow up. You have a huge risk of injury, and you feel like you're doing something right, but you're failing. And I look at that from a psychological perspective. I'm like, I don't want to see athletes failing a lot in their builds, because that's going to be a really rocky road going into race day where they start to feel like they can't do it. So remember, marathon pace is an effort, not a number on the watch. Your body, your physiology does not care about the number on the watch. It cares about the effort it's putting in to do the output. And so if conditions are tough, you have to adjust. You have to slow down to maintain the same effort or physiological stimulus. So I spoke about cold, but I'll share a bit of a story. I had an athlete training in the summer last year, and it was super gross out, super humid, high 90s Fahrenheit. And we literally slowed their marathon pace work down by about 45 to 50 seconds a mile because it was so hot. He was so angry at first. He thought, there's no way this is going to work. I'm running slow. How's it ever going to work? I'm never going to run my goal on race day. But I assured him, well, we're still getting the training effect. Your body doesn't care that you're running 8:45s, 8:50s instead of 8 minutes. It cared that it was sustaining the right effort. And so when we got to race day and it was cool, he crushed it. I think it was a 13 or 14 minute PR at the time, and loved every moment of it. And so the example that I use all the time is, if I took you and I moved you up to Flagstaff, Arizona right now, it's 7,100 feet. By the end of day one, you'd be like, I can't run this fast. And you go, why? Because of the altitude. So you would adjust for the environment. We know this cognitively for altitude, but yet we never do it for heat or cold or snow or footing or rolling hill. I encourage you to adjust the same way. Don't let the ego go about what it is I need to see on my watch to prove that I'm race ready. Which brings me to the next mistake: doing too much marathon pace too soon. A lot of people, especially newer runners, when they get into a training block for a marathon, they think they should be doing marathon pace from day one. But marathon pace work is very specific and it's quite demanding. If you're doing it and you don't have the aerobic base yet, or the durability, or the volume even to support it, you're grinding yourself down. You're putting yourself at risk of being the fittest person in the stands watching your friends on race day. And so I typically don't introduce marathon pace work until we're about 8 to 10 weeks out from race day. Before that, we're building the engine, we're building the chassis, we've got easy miles, we've got long runs, we're doing some tempo and VO2 max work to level up. And once the base is there, we'll layer in marathon pace. And I'm going to share some workouts at the end of this video that I use. Even once you've made it this far in the build, I'm still only doing marathon pace every other week. It's a big ask, and we still want to hit the other parts of training. Even in a marathon build, you don't want to lose the other aspects of training. You probably don't want to go any more than like 10 to 14 days without touching on every type of training. So VO2 max, tempo, aerobic, marathon pace and a marathon build. You want to train all of it to be successful on race day. But like any good baker knows, you can put flour, baking soda, eggs, milk to try and make a cake, but what makes it is the proportions that you do to make the recipe. And that recipe is different depending on the cake and the size and the flavor and what other things you're adding to it. That's the way you have to think about your individual marathon. The final mistake I want to talk about is not fueling during your marathon pace runs. This is something that we're starting to see a lot more in the research thanks to the ultra world, where people have started to realize that you can push the fueling way up. And so I encourage you, I want you to pay attention to your fueling during marathon pace runs. It's often overlooked. We just think, oh yeah, I'll just grab whatever's on the side of the road on marathon race day. It doesn't work that way. Marathon pace runs are a key opportunity to train your gut at the intensities and duration that you are going to be racing at to take in as much fuel as possible. The second piece of that is it actually helps your recovery from the bout of exercise you're doing that day. And so if you're doing, as example, a 10-mile marathon pace run and you're not taking any gels, drinks, or fluids in, you're missing an opportunity to train your gut and figure out what works to you. And you're leaving a lot to chance on race day that I would not recommend. And so, as I mentioned off the top, if you do the marathon assessment guide, you'll get my free carb loading guide. It'll give you what to do the day before, the amounts, how much to take in your marathon training blocks in the weeks, as well as for race day. Generally, what I recommend is 80 to 100 grams per hour. You might not be able to be there yet. That might cause you massive GI distress. But in the guide, it'll show you how you actually go from week 1 to week 12 in race day, building up that tolerance. So I want to encourage you to treat your marathon pace runs like they are your dress rehearsals. Use the same fueling strategy, building up to see what your maximum is every time, every long run, every marathon pace run, to plan so you know exactly what to do on race day. I said off the top, I was going to share some workouts. I'm going to spread this across the spectrum of performances because I work with everybody from 212 to 5-6 hours, and explain a little bit about the structure of them. And so these are plug and play sessions that I use with athletes. If you want to see a full build, you can look at the Thomas Knob series that we'll link here to see what we did for his entire build leading to 212 with the Marathon Project. But I want you to remember that the workouts I'm about to give you, the builds I'm going to show you, are simply frameworks. They're not gospel. Even when I work with an athlete, their builds are different depending on where they are. So we need to adjust depending on how you're feeling, what the conditions are, what your fitness is, what the gaps are in your performance. So here's the first one. So we're maybe 12 weeks out, maybe 10. We want to start introducing marathon pace. This is one where I like to put in a decently long chunk at marathon pace because I want to have a good internal test when we start the build about what it is marathon pace actually feels like. So I might do something like 20 to 30 minutes warm up, 60 minutes at marathon pace, and 20 to 30 minutes warm down. And so the reason why I like this one, you get a little like fear as you go into it, but it's a long run, 2-ish hours. It teaches you real quick what marathon pace is. 60 minutes, remember, if we compare that to tempo, we're going to find out real fast if you're going too hard because 60 minutes is about tempo. So if you start off closer to tempo effort and you start to fail, we know you're well off the pace. The other reason why I like the 20 to 30 minute cool down after is it kind of psychologically says to you, I'm still going to have to run after this, so I better not crush that. So that's the first session I like to use, maybe 1 to 3 weeks in the build, let's say. Let's say we're mid-build, we're 6 to 8 weeks out from the race. Now, we've got the duration, we've got the volume, we're getting confident that the base pace and, durability is there. I might do something like 2.5 hours where we alternate 30 minutes at E pace, 30 minutes at M pace. You end up with a decent amount of marathon pace. It's broken up. It's over a longer run, and you start to build some of that durability. You practice that feeling. You start to feel what it's like to be tired at the end. It also teaches you to settle back into pace after a break. So you've got to slow back down to easy pace, and then you have to pick it back up. And this is a useful skill for race day because it teaches you if you do need to back off because you've gone out slow, you've already experienced what that's like. The final one, and I think the most important one that I try to include in almost all my builds, is 3 to 4 weeks out, depending on the runner. This is where you're probably close to peak fitness, you're super confident, the build's gone well, you've done some long runs, sustained effort. I'll look at having athletes do 20 to 30 minute warm up, 90 to 100 minutes at marathon pace, 20 to 30 minutes warm down. And I'll tell you why I like this one, because you want to know 90 to 100 minutes, can I do that comfortably? Could I add another hour today while I've still got training fatigue? If the answer is no, I'd rather you find out at 10 miles or 8 miles or whatever it might be for you in this workout that pace is too fast than to find it out 8-10 miles on race day. This is your big dress rehearsal, full fueling, full shoes, if possible, gear, everything you can do to simulate race day. This is the test. This is the workout that if we've been pacing correctly and we've been feeling good and we've been following a good training plan, we can leave that workout going, I'm ready. I'm good to go. This is great. I'm excited. And if we leave that workout going, I don't know if I'm ready, we can adjust the race pace goals and expectations 3 to 4 weeks out versus on race day in the middle of the race when it's devastating and all the what feels like pressure that we've put on ourselves is right there. The last piece I want to touch on is how marathon pace changes across the race. This is where a lot of athletes really mess it up. I've talked about this in this video where you should go off feel and effort. But on race day, marathon pace or effort isn't static across 26.2. It's kind of building throughout. What marathon pace feels like at mile 5 is going to feel different than it does at mile 20. So even if you're hitting the same splits, I want to break this down a little bit in a chunked way that people can probably take home and use. So the first 10 miles should feel controlled and easy. If you're running true marathon pace in the first 10 miles, it should be almost boring. You're like, is this too slow? The crowds look great today. I see other people passing me. Should I be going faster? That's normal. That's exactly right. You're banking energy for later. A lot of people blow up in marathons because they let the adrenaline in the crowd push them. They let their ego take over. If I just bank 10 to 15 seconds a mile in the first half, I always blow up, therefore I'm going to be saving it. No. Sorry, don't do that. You're just going to make the blow up even worse. Trust your effort. It should be easy. Stay controlled. If we move into miles 10 to 18, it should start to feel like work, but sustainable. So this is where marathon pace feels like marathon pace. You're working, but you're in control. Your breathing is steady. You're hitting your splits. You're feeling strong. This is the meat of the race. So stay patient. Don't speed up. Don't slow down. Just be a metronome. And so miles 18 now to 26. This is where things get real. So even if you've paced perfectly, the last 10K of a marathon is hard. Maybe your fueling's gone really well. Maybe you're starting to feel a little bit bloated. There's lots of things that be going on. Your muscles are fatigued. Legs are starting to hurt. But if you've trained properly and you've paced properly, you should still be able to hold your pace or close to it. It's going to feel harder. The effort for the same pace is much higher than it was at mile 10. Here's the secret. If you've been conservative or on pace, not ahead in the first 18 miles, you might even have something left to pick it up in the last 10K. Not a full sprint, but a slight lift that gets you to finish strong. I have a video with an athlete, Cassie, who actually did this for the first time in her life and ran a 12-minute PR and qualified for Boston. I know I'm just some talking head saying this, but I'm trying to show you real life athletes that do this and actually achieve their goals so you can believe that you can do it too. Okay, so let's wrap this up because this has been a long video already, and I'm sure, and if you've made it this far, thank you. I appreciate it. Marathon pace is individual and context dependent. Marathon pace in training feels easier than you think. You should adjust for conditions. Don't do too much too soon. Practice your fueling strategy. Ask yourself the critical question. Could I do this for 26.2 miles if I were to have to do it in a race? Hopefully this deep dive helped you. If you've made it this far, thank you. I'm excited that you've done it. I hope you're excited for your next marathon. Please check out the marathon readiness assessment. You're going to get a carb loading guide. You're going to also get my mental performance documents from my book, all free. I want to give it to you so you have as much support as possible for race day. If you're training for a race right now, leave a comment. Tell us what you're training for. I'd love to hear about it and track you along. If you want, you can add me on Strava, Instagram, etc. Happy to see how your build is going.